I was halfway through splitting a stubborn log when I first saw Ethan Walker. The axe struck clean, but the wood resisted, fibers clinging together as if refusing to separate. I remember thinking that some things only look solid until pressure exposes the fault lines. At the time, I didn't realize I was thinking about more than firewood. My name is Daniel Carter, and that afternoon I was alone at my uncle's cabin, an old wooden structure tucked deep into the trees outside town. Ryan Mitchell, my boyfriend of 4 years, had suggested I spend the weekend there to clear my head. He'd said it kindly, but absently, eyes fixed on his laptop screen while numbers and deadlines swallowed him whole. Ryan works in finance. Long hours, longer silences. When we first met, he used to talk about everything: books, travel, the future we'd build. Lately, our conversations had narrowed to groceries, bills, and whose turn it was to do laundry. We weren't unhappy, exactly. We were stable, predictable, careful. I told myself that stability was enough. The forest was quiet except for the rhythmic thud of metal biting into wood. Sweat slid down my back, grounding me in something physical and uncomplicated. Splitting logs made sense. You applied force, and something changed. It either broke clean or it didn't. No guessing, no emotional negotiations. That was when I sensed someone watching. I turned, expecting a deer or maybe one of the neighbors from farther down the dirt road. Instead, a man stood a few yards away, hands tucked casually into the pockets of a worn denim jacket. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something open in his expression, something unguarded. "Need a hand?" he asked. His voice was steady, warm without trying too hard. I straightened, resting the axe against the chopping block. "I think I've got it," I replied, brushing sawdust from my palms. "But thanks." He stepped closer, careful but confident. Up close, I noticed the faint scar along his chin and the way his dark hair curled slightly at the ends. He looked like someone who spent time outdoors, like he belonged here. "I'm Ethan," he said, offering his hand. "Daniel." His grip was firm, grounding. He didn't hold on too long, but he didn't rush it either. "I just moved into the cabin up the road," Ethan Walker explained, gesturing vaguely through the trees. "Still figuring out which logs are worth the fight." I huffed a quiet laugh. "Some of them make you work for it." "Guess that's true about most things," he replied, eyes flicking to mine with a weight that felt deliberate. There was a pause then, not awkward, but charged. The kind of silence that invites something more if you're brave enough to take it. "So, you live out here full-time?" he asked. "No, just weekends. My boyfriend prefers the city." The word boyfriend left my mouth instinctively, like a reflex. I watched for his reaction and caught the smallest shift, surprise, maybe, or recalibration. But he didn't retreat. "That's fair," Ethan said evenly. "City life isn't for everyone. And cabin life isn't either," I added. Maybe I'm trying something new. There was honesty in that statement. Or maybe I wanted there to be. We talked longer than necessary, about the woods, about how quiet it gets after sunset, about how strange it feels to hear your own thoughts too clearly. Ethan mentioned he'd recently come out of a long relationship. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask, but something in his tone carried the weight of unfinished chapters. I found myself telling him more than I meant to. That Ryan worked too much. That I sometimes felt like a background character in my own life. The words slipped out before I could stop them, softened by the anonymity of trees and open sky. Ethan didn't offer solutions. He just listened. When I finally lifted the axe again, splitting the stubborn log clean down the center, he smiled as if I'd accomplished something more significant than chopping wood. "Looks like you won," he said. "For now." He nodded, stepping backward toward the tree line. "I'll let you get back to it. Maybe I'll see you around, Daniel." The way he said my name lingered longer than it should have. "Yeah," I replied. "Maybe." I watched him disappear between the trees, the forest swallowing him as easily as it had revealed him. The quiet returned, but it felt different, less peaceful, more expectant. I raised the axe again, but my rhythm was off. My mind replayed the conversation, the pauses, the careful glances. It was harmless, I told myself. Just a neighbor introducing himself. Just conversation. Still, as the final log split and fell apart at my feet, I couldn't shake the uneasy awareness that something else had cracked open too. And this time, I wasn't sure it would be as simple to fix. I told myself I wouldn't look for Ethan Walker. That promise lasted exactly 2 days. On Sunday morning, I walked into town for coffee instead of brewing it at the cabin. I justified the change as restlessness, a need to move, but the truth was sharper. I wondered if he would be there. The cafe was small, all chipped mugs and sun-faded curtains, the kind of place where conversations linger longer than the steam rising from the cups. Ethan was already seated by the window. He noticed me at the same moment I noticed him, and something unspoken passed between us, recognition layered with choice. I could have nodded politely and ordered my coffee to go. Instead, I walked over. "Daniel," he said, like he'd expected me. "Ethan." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "You surviving the woodpile?" "Barely," I replied, sitting down before I could reconsider. The conversation resumed too easily. We spoke about inconsequential things at first, the weather shifting colder, the stubbornness of old cabins, but beneath the surface ran a current neither of us acknowledged. He asked questions that required more than yes or no. He listened with intent. When I spoke, he held my gaze long enough to make me feel chosen. That was new. Ryan Mitchell used to look at me like that. In the early years, his attention had felt like sunlight, steady and warm. Lately, it had become fluorescent and practical, illuminating only what needed fixing. The night before I left for the cabin, I tried to tell him I felt distant. "We're just busy," Ryan had said, barely glancing up from his phone. "It'll pass." I hadn't pushed. I rarely did. Now, sitting across from Ethan, I felt something shift inside me, something loosening after being clenched too long. "Do you ever feel like you're living on autopilot?" Ethan asked, stirring his coffee absently. "All the time," I admitted. He leaned back slightly. "That's why I moved out here. I needed quiet, space to hear myself think." "And?" I asked. "And I'm still figuring out what I've been trying not to hear." His honesty unsettled me because it mirrored my own. I told him about Ryan's long hours, about the way our apartment had grown quiet even when we were both home. I chose my words carefully, avoiding blame, but the dissatisfaction slipped through anyway. Ethan didn't criticize Ryan. He didn't need to. His silence allowed my doubts to grow without resistance. When we left the cafe, the air was cooler, and the sky threatened rain. We walked back toward the cabins together, steps unhurried. At some point, our hands brushed. It could have been accidental. It probably was, but neither of us apologized. "You deserve to feel seen," Ethan said softly as we reached the fork in the road where we would part. The statement struck deeper than it should have. I opened my mouth to protest, to defend Ryan, to defend myself, but the words felt hollow. I had grown so accustomed to minimizing my own loneliness that hearing it acknowledged felt almost dangerous. "I am seen," I said finally, though it sounded less certain than I intended. Ethan studied me, not confrontational, just thoughtful. "Are you?" The question lingered after we separated, echoing louder than the quiet forest around me. That night, back in the city, Ryan was sprawled on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees. The glow from the screen painted his face in cold light. I stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for him to notice me. "Hey," he said without looking up. "How was the cabin?" "Good," I replied. "Quiet, that's good." His fingers continued typing. "We should go together sometime." "Yeah," I said, though we both knew he wouldn't. I watched him for a moment longer, hoping he'd sense the distance growing between us, but he remained absorbed in numbers and deadlines. I felt like furniture, present, functional, unexamined. Later, lying beside him in the dark, I found myself replaying Ethan's voice instead of Ryan's steady breathing. I told myself it was harmless. Just conversation. Just someone new in an otherwise predictable landscape. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from Ethan, made it through the rain. "Hope you did too." It was simple, innocent, even. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before typing back, "Yeah. I did." The reply came quickly. "Good. I'd hate to lose my favorite wood-splitting neighbor." I smiled despite myself. Beside me, Ryan shifted in his sleep but didn't wake. I set the phone down, heart beating faster than the moment warranted. I hadn't crossed a line, not technically. There had been no confessions, no touches that couldn't be explained away. And yet, as I lay there in the darkness, I understood something unsettling. I was beginning to look forward to a life that did not include the man sleeping next to me. That realization felt less like a thought and more like the first undeniable crack. The distance between Ryan Mitchell and me stopped being subtle. It settled into our apartment like a third presence, quiet, watchful, impossible to ignore. We still moved around each other with practiced familiarity, but something essential had shifted. I answered his questions with fewer details. He stopped asking follow-ups. One evening, while we ate takeout at the kitchen counter, Ryan looked at me longer than usual. "You've been different," he said. "Different how?" I kept my tone neutral, focusing on unwrapping my chopsticks. "Quieter, distracted." He hesitated. "Did something happen at the cabin?" The question was careful, not accusatory. That almost made it worse. "Nothing happened," I replied, which was both true and not. Ryan studied me, then nodded once, as if accepting the explanation because challenging it required more energy than he had left. Okay, the conversation ended there, suspended between what was said and what wasn't. 2 days later, I drove back to the cabin alone. I told Ryan I needed another weekend to finish the woodpile. He agreed without argument, already halfway absorbed in a conference call. The forest greeted me with the same steady silence, but I felt less anchored than before. I hadn't texted Ethan Walker to say I was coming. I told myself that restraint mattered. He was waiting on his porch anyway. "I had a feeling," Ethan said as I stepped out of my car. "A feeling?" I asked, trying to sound amused rather than exposed. "You don't strike me as someone who leaves things unfinished." His gaze lingered on me, searching for something beneath the surface. I felt transparent under it. We didn't pretend this time. No small talk about logs or weather. We walked straight toward the narrow path behind the cabins, the one that opened into a clearing where sunlight filtered through tall pines. The air smelled like damp earth and something unsettled. "You've been on my mind," Ethan said finally. The honesty in his voice stripped away my defenses. "You shouldn't say that," I replied, though my steps slowed. "Why not? It's true. I have a boyfriend." "I know." He stopped walking, forcing me to face him. "But every time you're here, Daniel, you look like you can finally breathe." His words felt intrusive because they were accurate. I thought of Ryan's distracted nods, of the way our conversations had grown mechanical. I thought of the message Ethan sent that first night and how my heart had leapt at something so small. "That doesn't mean anything," I insisted. "It means something to you," Ethan said quietly. Silence stretched between us, taut and fragile. I could still turn back. I could walk away, drive home, pretend this was nothing more than misplaced curiosity. Instead, I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What do you want from me?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I want you to stop pretending you're happy when you're not." The statement hit harder than any accusation could have. I had spent months convincing myself that stability equaled contentment, that routine was a mature substitute for desire. Hearing the lie exposed felt both humiliating and relieving. "You don't know my relationship," I said, but the protest lacked conviction. "I know what I see," Ethan replied. "And I see someone who's lonely." Lonely. The word lodged in my chest. I had never allowed myself to name it so plainly. Before I could rethink it, I stepped closer. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough that stepping back would have required effort. His expression shifted, not triumphant, not predatory, just vulnerable. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I whispered. "Neither do I." But neither of us moved away. The first touch was hesitant, almost questioning. His hand brushed mine, fingers tentative, giving me space to withdraw. I didn't. My pulse thundered in my ears, loud enough to drown out reason. When his hand slid fully into mine, the contact felt both foreign and inevitable. This was the line. I knew it even before his other hand rose to my jaw, before his thumb traced the edge of my cheek with careful deliberation. He paused, searching my face for resistance. I could have said Ryan's name. I could have stepped back. Instead, I closed the distance. The kiss was slow, uncertain at first, as though we were both testing the reality of it. Then it deepened, not frantic, not reckless, but deliberate. Months of quiet dissatisfaction poured into that single moment, into the surrender of restraint. When we finally pulled apart, the clearing felt smaller, the air thinner. I had wanted to feel seen. Now I was exposed. Ethan rested his forehead lightly against mine. "Daniel," he murmured, as if the name itself were a question. Guilt surfaced quickly, sharp and immediate. I pictured Ryan at our kitchen counter, asking if something had happened. I had said no. Now something had. I stepped back first. "We shouldn't," I said, though the words arrived too late to undo anything. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what we'd crossed. "What are you going to do?" The question hung between us, heavier than the silence that followed. For the first time since I met him, I didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep the night after I kissed Ethan Walker. The cabin walls seemed closer, the silence heavier. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan Mitchell standing in our kitchen, asking if something had happened. I had answered him without hesitation. Now the lie felt like a fracture spreading through everything we had built. By morning, avoidance felt cowardly. I drove back to the city earlier than planned. The highway blurred past, each mile tightening the knot in my chest. I rehearsed explanations, softened versions of the truth, sentences that might protect us both from the full weight of what I had done. None of them felt honest enough. Ryan was home when I arrived, seated at the dining table with paperwork spread around him. He looked up immediately, surprised. "You're back early," he said. "Yeah." My voice sounded unfamiliar to me. "We need to talk." The air shifted. Ryan closed his laptop slowly, giving me his full attention in a way he hadn't in months. The gesture almost made me falter. "What's going on?" he asked. I remained standing, unsure if sitting would make this easier or harder. "When you asked me if something happened at the cabin, I wasn't honest." Ryan's expression didn't change at first, but his shoulders stiffened. "Okay, there's someone there," I continued, each word deliberate. "His name is Ethan. We've been talking. More than just talking." The silence that followed was absolute. "Are you telling me you cheated?" Ryan's tone was steady, but something brittle edged its way into it. "I didn't plan to," I said, hating how inadequate that sounded. It started as conversation. I told myself it wasn't crossing a line. And then, he pressed. And then I crossed it. The admission landed between us like something solid and irreversible. Ryan stood, not abruptly, but with contained restraint. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 100 times during stressful moments at work. This time it was personal. "How long?" he asked. "A few weeks," I replied. "It wasn't physical until recently." Ryan let out a breath that almost resembled a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "4 years, Daniel. 4 years, and you couldn't talk to me before it got to this." "I tried," I said quietly. "I told you I felt distant. And I said we were busy. That's not the same as giving up." "I didn't give up," I insisted, though doubt crept in even as I spoke. "I felt invisible. And when someone finally looked at me like I mattered." "You chose him," Ryan finished. The simplicity of the statement stripped away my defenses. I hadn't chosen Ethan over Ryan in a single dramatic moment. I had chosen attention over neglect, validation over patience. The betrayal had grown in small, rationalized steps. Ryan's voice softened, which somehow hurt more. "Did you ever plan on telling me?" "Yes," I said, and this time it was true. "I just didn't know how." He nodded slowly, absorbing the answer. "Do you love him?" The question pierced deeper than anything else. I thought of Ethan's steady gaze, of the way he had named my loneliness without flinching. I thought of the kiss in the clearing, of how alive it had made me feel. Then I thought of the quiet mornings Ryan and I had once shared, of the life we had built piece by piece. "I don't know," I admitted. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself. "That might be worse." Quote, "We stood there facing each other, two men who had once been certain about their future and now weren't certain about tomorrow. I can't compete with a feeling," Ryan said finally. "If you don't know what you want, I won't beg you to stay." The dignity in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. "I never wanted to hurt you," I whispered. "But you did." There was no accusation in the statement, only truth. I packed a bag that evening. Not because Ryan demanded it, but because space felt necessary, space to decide whether what I had broken could be repaired, or whether it had already splintered beyond recognition. At the door, I hesitated. Ryan stood in the hallway, arms crossed, not blocking my exit but not stepping aside emotionally either. "Call me when you figure it out," he said. "If you figure it out." Outside, the city felt louder than usual, indifferent to the quiet collapse of my relationship. I didn't drive to Ethan's cabin. Instead, I pulled over several blocks away and sat in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel just as they had after that first kiss. The choice in front of me no longer felt romantic or thrilling. It felt heavy, complicated, real. For the first time since meeting Ethan, the question wasn't what I felt for him. It was who I was becoming, and whether I was willing to live with that version of myself.